The cot creaked beneath her weight as consciousness returned in fragments. First came the ache, a dull throb along her ribs where the wagon wheel had caught her. Then the cold, seeping through thin walls like water through worn cloth. Ada Evelyn Marlowe opened her eyes to find herself staring at rough-hewn ceiling beams she'd never seen before. The room smelled of carbolic and dried sage. A small window to her left showed nothing but Wyoming sky, that particular shade of winter gray that promised more snow before nightfall. She tried to sit up, gasped at the sharp protest from her side, and fell back against the lumpy pillow. "You're awake." The voice came from the doorway, deep, measured, like stones dropping into still water. Ada turned her head, ignoring the wave of dizziness, to see a man filling the frame. He was tall enough to duck slightly under the lintel, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, some indeterminate color between brown and gray, watched her with careful neutrality. "Where am I?" Her voice came out raspy, unfamiliar. "Doc Harlan's back room. You've been here 3 days." He stepped inside, his boots heavy on the plank floor. "The stage driver brought you in. Said your wagon overturned near Devil's Bend." Memory rushed back the sudden crack of the axle, the world tilting sideways, her carpetbag flying from her grasp as the horses screamed. She'd been traveling alone to Dry Pine, responding to an advertisement for a housekeeper position with Reverend Matthew Ward. "My things." "Gone. Driver said everything scattered to the wind or got trampled." The man moved to a small table by the wall, poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Nothing left but what you were wearing in this?" He pulled something from his pocket, her mother's Bible. Water-stained and bent, but intact. The sight of it made her throat tight. 28 years she'd carried that book, through 3 states and more troubles than she cared to count. "Thank you," she managed, accepting both the water and the Bible. The water was cold, almost painful going down her parched throat. The man watched her drink, then said, "I'm Cassian Ward." The name made her pause mid-swallow. "Ward, are you?" "Matthew was my brother." The past tense hung heavy in the air. "Fever took him last week. I came to town to settle his affairs. Heard about a woman coming to keep house for him." His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Figured that might be you." Ada set down the cup with trembling fingers. No position, no destination, no belongings save a ruined dress and a Bible. The familiar weight of having nothing pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She'd spent the last of her money on stage fare, believing she was heading towards something steady, something safe. "I should go," she said, though she had no idea where. In this weather, with broken ribs and no coat. Cassian shook his head. "Doc says you need at least another week before you can travel. Besides, there's nowhere to go. Next stage doesn't come through for 10 days. She closed her eyes, fighting the panic rising in her throat. In Baltimore, in St. Louis, in Denver, there had always been somewhere to go, some kitchen that needed an extra hand, some wealthy woman who wanted a companion. But here, in this tiny Wyoming town with a name she couldn't even remember, she was trapped. "I can't pay for the doctor," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "Already settled." Cassian moved toward the door, then stopped. "My brother left 2 daughters. Sarah's 12, Margaret's 7. They need someone to look after them." Ada opened her eyes, found him watching her with that same careful expression. "I'm not offering charity." He continued, "I need help. You need work. Same arrangement you had with Matthew, room, board, and wages. Only difference is you'd be coming to my place instead of his." "I've never been a governess." The advertisement said housekeeper. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Read?" "Yes." "Then you can teach them their letters and keep them fed. That's all they need." He turned back to face her fully. "I run cattle north of town. I'm gone dawn to dusk most days. The girls have been staying with Mrs. Henderson since Matthew died, but she's got 6 of her own and can't keep them much longer." Ada studied him, this stranger offering her salvation with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with the kind of weathered look that came from too many seasons under hard sun and bitter wind. His clothes were clean, but worn canvas pants, a wool shirt patched at the elbows, boots that had seen better decades. Not poor, but not prosperous either. "Why?" she asked finally. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you came all this way for a job that no longer exists. I know you've got nowhere else to go, and I know my nieces need someone." He shrugged. Seemed straightforward enough. It wasn't, of course. Nothing involving a single woman and a widowed man could be straightforward, not in a small town where reputation meant everything. But Ada had learned long ago that desperation made its own rules. "Your wife died 2 winters ago." The words were flat, final, discouraging further inquiry. "There's a separate room for you, off the kitchen. The house is a mile from town, but the road's good when it's not snowing. A mile from town, isolated, alone with a man she didn't know and 2 grieving children. Every instinct told her to refuse, to find another way. But the cold seeping through the walls reminded her that winter in Wyoming didn't care about propriety or careful choices. Neither did hunger. "All right," she heard herself say. Cassian nodded once, as if they'd concluded a business transaction, which, she supposed, they had. "I'll come back tomorrow, see how you're healing. If Doc clears it, we'll head out Monday." He moved toward the door again, then paused. "That book, was it your mother's?" Ada's fingers tightened on the worn leather cover. "Yes. My brother was a godly man. He would have appreciated that." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but a softening. "The girls will, too." Then he was gone, leaving Ada alone with the ache in her ribs and the weight of a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. She pulled the thin blanket higher, clutched the Bible to her chest, and wondered what kind of life waited for her in that house a mile from nowhere. The cot creaked again as she shifted, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. 3 days, he'd said. 3 days lost to fever and pain while the world rearranged itself around her. Matthew Ward dead. Her position gone. Everything she'd owned scattered across a Wyoming hillside. But she was alive. That had to count for something. Ada closed her eyes and began to pray not for deliverance or miracles, but for the simple strength to face whatever came next. In the corner, a spider worked patiently on its web, and somewhere beyond the walls, the town of Dry Pine went about its business, unaware that a stranger's fate had just been decided in Doc Harlan's back room. Monday. Cassian had said 3 more days to heal, to gather what courage she could find. 3 days before she walked into a house still haunted by another woman's absence. To care for children who didn't know her. To work for a man who looked at her with eyes that gave away nothing. She'd been in worse situations. At least, that's what she told herself as the afternoon light faded and the cold pressed closer. She'd survived Baltimore. She'd survived the journey west. She would survive this too. The spider finished another row of its web, methodical and sure. Ada watched it work until her eyes grew heavy. The Bible still pressed against her heart, like armor against an uncertain world. The wagon ride from town tested every healing rib in Ada's chest. Cassian handled the reins with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything, navigating frozen ruts and snow-covered stones while she clutched her pathetic bundle of possessions, the Bible. A clean dress Mrs. Henderson had donated, and a wool shawl that had seen better decades. "Road gets rough past Miller's Creek," he said, the first words he'd spoken since helping her into the wagon. "Hold tight." She gripped the wooden seat edge as they lurched over a particularly deep rut. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, white snow, gray sage, and the distant purple shadows of mountains. No trees to speak of, just the occasional twisted juniper clinging to a hillside. The emptiness of it made her chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. The house appeared suddenly as they crested a small rise, a 2-story cabin of weathered logs. Smoke rising from a stone chimney. A barn sat to the left, along with a few outbuildings she couldn't identify. It looked solid, permanent, like it had grown from the earth itself. Nothing like the cramped Baltimore tenements or Denver boarding houses she'd known. 2 small figures burst from the front door before Cassian had even stopped the wagon. "Papa?" The smaller one, Margaret. Ada remembered, flew down the steps, dark braids streaming behind her. The older girl, Sarah, followed more slowly, her face guarded. "Whoa there, Magpie!" Cassian swung down and caught Margaret before she could slip on the icy ground. "Where's your coat?" "Inside, Mrs. Henderson said you were bringing the new lady." Margaret peered around her father at Ada with frank curiosity. "Is that her? She looks cold." "Margaret!" Sarah's voice held a warning. She stood by the door, arms crossed, studying Ada with eyes that seemed too knowing for 12 years. "Come inside before you freeze." Cassian helped Ada down from the wagon, his hands careful but impersonal at her waist. The short walk to the house left her breathless. Whether from exertion or nerves, she couldn't say. The interior was warmer than she'd expected, a fire crackling in a large stone fireplace. The main room served as both parlor and dining room, with a kitchen visible through an open doorway. Everything was clean but sparse. A few straight-backed chairs, a table that had been scrubbed raw, a braided rug that had lost most of its color to time and use. "Your room's through there." Cassian nodded toward a door off the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's private." Ada stepped into the small room and nearly cried. After years of shared quarters, curtained corners, and sleeping in kitchens, the tiny space felt like a palace, a narrow bed with a quilt, a washstand, a wooden crate that served as a table, and blessed luxury, a small window looking out toward the mountains. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. When she emerged, Margaret had attached herself to her father's leg while Sarah set the table with mechanical precision. "Girls," Cassian said, "this is Miss Marlowe. She'll be staying with us, helping out." "Like Mama used to?" Margaret asked, then immediately clapped a hand over her mouth. The silence that followed was sharp as winter air. Sarah's hands stilled on the plates. Cassian's face went carefully blank. "No," Ada said gently, kneeling despite the protest from her ribs to meet Margaret's eyes. "Not like your mama. Nobody could be like her. I'm just here to help with cooking and lessons. Maybe some mending. Is that all right?" Margaret studied her with those 2 bright eyes, then nodded solemnly. "Can you make biscuits? Papa burns them." "I can make biscuits. Good ones. We'll have to see, won't we?" This seemed to satisfy the child, who detached from her father and went to help her sister. Cassian watched the exchange with an expression Ada couldn't read. "Supper's at 6, he said finally. "There's salt pork and beans in the kitchen, some preserved vegetables in the root cellar. Make do with what you find." Then he was gone, out to tend the stock, leaving Ada alone with 2 girls who watched her like she might sprout wings or disappear entirely. She unpacked her pitiful belongings first, setting the Bible on the crate beside the bed. The donated dress went on a peg brown wool, patched but serviceable. Everything she owned fit in that tiny room with space to spare. In the kitchen, she took inventory. The pantry was better stocked than she'd expected: flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, lard, dried beans, preserved tomatoes, even some dried apples. The stove was a good one, cast iron and well-maintained. Pots hung from hooks, all of them scoured clean. "Mama liked things just so," Sarah said from the doorway. "Everything in its place." "That's a good way to be," Ada replied carefully. "Easier to find things when you need them." Sarah moved into the kitchen, running a finger along the table's edge. She's been gone 2 years. Papa doesn't talk about her. Ada busied herself checking the stove's firebox, giving the girl space to talk or not as she chose. Margaret doesn't remember much. She was only 5. Sarah's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the table. I remember everything. That must be hard. Mrs. Henderson says it's a blessing to forget. The girl's tone suggested what she thought of Mrs. Henderson's opinion. I think forgetting would be worse. Ada nodded, thinking of her own mother, dead these 15 years but still vivid in memory. I think you're right. Remembering hurts, but it's how we keep them with us. Sarah looked at her then. Really looked. And some of the suspicion eased from her face. Can you really make good biscuits? I worked in a bakery in St. Louis, Ada admitted. I can make biscuits that would make angels weep. The ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. Papa really does burn them, and everything else. Margaret and I have been eating a lot of beans. Well then, Ada said, rolling up her sleeves despite the pull in her ribs. We'd better get started on supper, hadn't we? They worked together in companionable silence. Sarah showing her where things were kept, Margaret wandering in and out with questions and observations. The girls were clearly starved for female company, for the small domestic rituals their mother's death had stolen from them. By the time Cassian returned, stamping snow from his boots, the kitchen smelled of baking biscuits and simmering beans flavored with the last of someone's careful hoard of herbs. He stopped in the doorway, something flickering across his face as he took in the scene Sarah setting the table while Margaret practiced her letters on a slate, Ada pulling golden biscuits from the oven. Smells good, he said finally. Miss Ada used to work in a bakery, Margaret announced. She makes angel biscuits. Angel weeping biscuits, Sarah corrected. Because they're so good they make angels cry. That seems sad, Margaret said, frowning. Why would angels cry about biscuits? The theological discussion that followed lasted through dinner, with Margaret positing increasingly creative theories about heavenly baked goods, while Sarah played the skeptic. Cassian said little, but Ada caught him almost smiling once when Margaret suggested that clouds were actually made of failed angel biscuits. After supper, the girls cleared while Ada washed dishes, her ribs protesting every movement. Cassian disappeared outside again, returning with an armload of firewood. Girls, time to get ready for bed. But Papa? No arguments. Magpie, Miss Marlowe needs rest, and so do you. They went, reluctantly. Sarah helping Margaret with her buttons and braids. Ada finished the dishes, wiped down the table, banked the stove for morning. Normal things, comforting in their familiarity. When she finally retreated to her small room, she found an additional blanket folded on her bed and the window fitted with a piece of oilcloth to block the worst of the drafts. Small kindnesses, offered without comment. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her mother's Bible but not opening it. Through the thin walls, she could hear Cassian's low voice reading to the girls, Margaret's giggle at something in the story, Sarah's quieter responses. A family missing a piece, trying to reshape itself around the absence, and her, the stranger, attempting to fill a space without taking what wasn't hers to claim. Ada changed into the donated nightgown, wincing at the pull in her ribs. The bed was narrow, but the mattress was good. The quilt heavy and warm. She lay carefully on her good side, watching shadows dance on the wall from the banked fire's glow seeping under the door. She'd unpacked nothing because she'd had nothing to unpack. Everything she owned fit on a single peg and a small crate. But somehow, lying in this small room in a house she'd never seen before today, she felt less empty than she had in years. Tomorrow there would be breakfast to make, lessons to plan, mending to sort through. Tomorrow she'd have to learn the rhythms of this household, find her place without overstepping. Tomorrow the real work would begin. But tonight, she was warm and fed and safe. The wind howled outside, but the walls were solid. In the main room, Cassian's footsteps moved in their evening pattern, banking the fire. Checking the door, the quiet preparations for night. "Don't watch me sleep," she'd begged him in the doctor's office, feverish and afraid. But here in his house, with his children fed and settled, his footsteps speaking of routine and reliability, she found she didn't mind the idea of being watched over. Just a little, just for now. The nightmare came as it always did, hands reaching, voices shouting, the smell of cheap whiskey and cheaper promises. Ada jerked awake, her breath coming in short gasps that sent fire through her healing ribs. The small room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight through the window, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the creak of a floorboard, the soft scrape of a chair being moved. Through the gap under her door, she saw the glow of lamplight in the main room. She lay still, heart hammering, trying to make sense of it. The house had been dark when she'd retired. Why would Cassian be up as she squinted at the moonlight what must be past midnight? Another sound, softer, a page turning. Despite every instinct screaming at her to stay in bed, to mind her own business, Ada rose. The donated nightgown hung loose on her frame, and she pulled the shawl around her shoulders before easing the door open. Cassian sat in the chair by the window, an open book in his lap, lamplight casting shadows across his face. He'd removed his boots but was otherwise fully dressed, as if he'd never intended to sleep. His head turned at the sound of her door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the darkened room. "Did I wake you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "No, She hesitated, unwilling to speak of nightmares to this near stranger. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, accepting the half-truth without question. His gaze returned to the window, and she realized he wasn't reading at all. The book was merely something to hold. "The girls," she asked. "Sleeping. Sarah's been having bad dreams since Matthew died. I listened for her." Ada moved closer, drawn by something in his tone. The chair he occupied faced the window, positioned so he could see both the girls' room and the door. Standing guard, she realized, watching over what remained of his family. "How long do you sit up?" "Until I'm sure they're settled. Sometimes an hour, sometimes till dawn." He glanced at her, then away. "You can go back to bed. I didn't mean to disturb you." But something kept her there, perhaps the loneliness that radiated from him like cold from a window pane. She lowered herself onto the bench near the fireplace, wincing slightly. "Your ribs still pain you." "Less each day." She adjusted the shawl, aware suddenly of the impropriety alone with a man in the dark hours, both of them in night clothes. But propriety seemed a fragile thing out here, where survival took precedence over society's rules. "That first night," she said carefully, "in the doctor's office. You were there." His hands stilled on the book. "You were fevered. Doc Harlan was with the Jameson boy who'd broken his leg. Someone had to watch you." "I asked you not to." The words came out smaller than she'd intended. "Begged, actually. I remember. But you stayed." "Turned my chair to the wall," he said quietly. "Watched the snow fall instead. But yes, I stayed. Couldn't leave you alone in that state, but I could give you what privacy I could." The simple kindness of it, the compromise between duty and dignity, made her throat tight. How many men would have thought to turn away while still keeping watch? "Thank you," she whispered. He shifted uncomfortably. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have—" "No," she interrupted, surprising them both. "They wouldn't have. Most would have left me alone or taken advantage of the watching. You did neither." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understandings. Finally, Cassian closed the book, a volume of poetry. She noticed with surprise. "My wife used to say I think too much about what's proper," he said. "Said I was so concerned with doing right that I forgot to do good." His smile was rueful, barely visible in the lamplight. Never could figure out what she meant until after she was gone. What was her name? Elizabeth. Beth. The name came soft, like a prayer. She was nothing like... He stopped, shook his head. She was warm where I'm cold, talked enough for both of us, made this house... alive, Ada supplied when he trailed off. Yes. He looked around the room as if seeing ghosts in every corner. The girls have her spirit, Margaret especially. Sarah, he sighed. Sarah's more like me, holds everything inside until it festers. Grief's like that sometimes, Ada said, like a wound that won't heal because we're afraid to let it. Speaking from experience. She thought of her mother, of other losses too numerous to name. Some. He studied her then, really looked at her for perhaps the first time since that initial meeting in the doctor's office. You don't talk about where you come from. Neither do you. Fair enough. He stood, moving to bank the fire. We all have our ghosts, I suppose. Is that why you watch? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Because of ghosts. He paused, poker in hand. Maybe, or maybe I just want to be sure nothing else gets taken while I'm not paying attention. He finished with the fire, turned back to her. You should sleep. Morning comes early here. She rose, recognizing dismissal, but at her door she turned back. He'd resumed his seat, the book open again though his eyes were on the window. Don't watch me sleep, she said softly. The words different now, not begging, but something else. Something she couldn't quite name. He didn't look at her, but she saw the slight nod. I wasn't, he replied, just as he had that first night. But this time she heard what he didn't say. I was watching over you. There's a difference. Back in her small room, Ada pulled the quilt to her chin and listened to the house settle around her. No more nightmares came. Instead, she drifted to sleep knowing that in the next room, a man sat guard against the dark, not watching her, but watching over her. His daughters, perhaps his own memories. In the morning, she woke to find his chair back in its usual place by the table. No sign of the late-night vigil save for drops of candle wax on the floor. The girls chattered through breakfast, and Cassian ate in his usual silence before heading out to tend the stock. But that evening, as she helped Sarah with her letters while Margaret practiced sums, Ada noticed Cassian's chair had been moved slightly, still facing the window, but angled now so he could see her door as well. She said nothing, merely continued the lesson. But when night came again and she heard the familiar creak of floorboards, the soft scrape of the chair, she slept easier knowing he kept watch. Not over her, he was too careful, too proper for that, but over the household that now included her. This small fortress against the Wyoming winter and whatever wolves real or metaphorical might howl outside their door. 3 nights later, when Sarah's nightmare came as predicted, Ada was ready. She heard the child's cry, Cassian's quick footsteps, his low voice offering comfort. Without thinking, she rose and heated milk on the stove, adding a precious bit of sugar and nutmeg. For Sarah, she said quietly when Cassian emerged from the girl's room. My mother used to make it when I couldn't sleep. He accepted the cup with something like wonder. Beth used to do the same. Good mothers think alike, I suppose. He started to speak, stopped, then simply nodded and returned to Sarah. Ada cleaned the pot, banked the stove, and went back to bed, but not before catching sight of Cassian's face as he coaxed his daughter to drink a mixture of grief and gratitude that made her understand why he sat up nights. Sometimes watching over something was the only way to believe it wouldn't disappear. From then on, when Sarah had nightmares, Ada had warm milk ready. When Margaret woke crying for her mother, Ada hummed the old hymns her own mother had sung, and when Cassian sat his nightly vigil, Ada slept knowing that in this house of careful distances and unspoken sorrows, she was becoming part of something worth watching over. The understanding between them deepened without words. She never asked him not to watch again, and he never turned his chair fully toward her door. But sometimes, on the coldest nights when the wind howled like a living thing, She'd hear him add wood to the fire and know it was as much for her comfort as for warmth. A strange dance, this careful kindness between strangers becoming something else. But in a house still learning how to be whole again, perhaps strange dances were exactly what was needed. The morning routine had settled into rhythm by the third week. Ada rose before dawn, stoking the fire and setting water to boil while the house still held night's chill. Cassian would appear silently, pull on his boots, and disappear to tend the stock. The girls would tumble from their room at first light, Margaret chattering before her feet hit the floor, Sarah moving with careful morning dignity. Breakfast was a quiet affair, biscuits and gravy, sometimes porridge, always coffee strong enough to strip paint. Cassian ate with focused efficiency, as if food were simply fuel for the day's labor. But Ada noticed he'd begun lingering an extra moment over his coffee, especially when Margaret regaled them with her dreams or Sarah shared something from her reading. "Papa, Miss Ada needs to go to town," Sarah announced this particular morning, apropos of nothing. Cassian looked up from his plate. "Does she now?" "For supplies," Sarah continued, her tone suggesting this was obvious. "We're near out of flour, and she's been mending our clothes with thread that's more patches than thread." "I can make do," Ada said quickly. "There's no need." "You've been making do since you got here," Sarah interrupted, then caught herself. "Pardon me, Miss Ada, but it's true." Margaret nodded vigorously, milk dotting her upper lip. "She fixed my Sunday dress with thread from an old sock." "Did she?" Cassian's gaze moved to Ada, who felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It worked fine. The color was close enough." "Close enough isn't the same as right," he said quietly. He pushed back from the table. "I'll hitch the wagon after I finish with the horses. Girls, you'll come too, Mrs. Henderson's been asking after you." The trip to town felt different from that first journey. Ada sat beside Cassian on the wagon seat while the girls bundled in back among empty grain sacks. The landscape that had seemed so forbidding 3 weeks ago now showed subtle beauty, the way snow clung to sagebrush, how the mountains changed color with the light. "Sarah's right," Cassian said suddenly. "You've been making do with nothing. Should have noticed sooner." "I've managed with less," Ada replied without thinking, then wished she could recall the words. He glanced at her, but didn't pursue it. "Make a list of what you need. Real needs. Not just what you think you can stretch further." In town, he handed her more money than she'd seen in months. "For the household," he said firmly when she tried to protest. "Get proper thread, enough flour for a month. Whatever else, I'll be at the feed store." Harmon's general store overwhelmed her with its abundance. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, sacks of flour and sugar another. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Harmon, greeted her with barely concealed curiosity. "You're the woman staying out at the Ward place." "Yes, ma'am, I'm helping with the girls." Mrs. Harmon's expression suggested volumes. Terrible thing about the Reverend, and poor Elizabeth before that. Those girls need a woman's touch. Ada focused on selecting thread, hoping to avoid further commentary. But Mrs. Harmon wasn't finished. "Course, some might say it's not entirely proper. A young woman like yourself out there with no chaperone but children." "Mr. Ward has been entirely respectful," Ada said quietly, adding spools to her basket. "Oh, I'm sure Cassian Ward's nothing if not proper. Too proper, Beth used to say." The woman leaned closer, voice dropping. "She was my cousin, you know, full of life. That one. Used to say marrying Cassian was like trying to warm stone possible, but requiring considerable effort." Ada set down the thread carefully. "I wouldn't know about that. Ma'am, I'm there for the children." "Of course you are." Mrs. Harmon's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just remember, dear, that some stones never warm, no matter how much heat you apply." Ada completed her purchases in silence, adding a precious peppermint stick for each girl to the pile. Outside, She found the girls showing Margaret's rag doll to a group of town children while Sarah stood slightly apart, watching. "Miss Ada," Margaret ran over. "Mary Jenkins says her mama says you're going to be our new mama." The words hit like cold water. "Oh, sweetheart, no, I told her that was stupid," Sarah cut in, her voice fierce. "We already had a mama. We don't need a new one." Ada knelt carefully, meeting Sarah's stormy eyes. "You're absolutely right. You had a mama, and no one could ever replace her. I'm just Miss Ada who makes biscuits and helps with lessons. Nothing more." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because Papa doesn't need a new wife either. He had one." "Sarah!" Cassian's voice came from behind them. How long had he been standing there? "Help load the supplies." The ride home was subdued. Margaret fell asleep against the grain sacks, but Sarah sat rigid, staring at the passing landscape. Cassian said nothing until they'd reached the house and the girls had run inside. "I apologize for Sarah," he said as they unloaded supplies. "She shouldn't have." "She's protecting what's hers," Ada interrupted. "Her memories, her family, her father. I understand." He paused. A sack of flour balanced on his shoulder. "Do you?" "My mother died when I was 13. If anyone had tried to replace her," she shrugged, "I'd have been just as fierce." Something shifted in his expression. "Is that when you started making do with less?" The question caught her off guard. "I suppose it was." He nodded, carried the flour inside without further comment. But that evening, she found a small package on her bed, new handkerchiefs, finer than anything she'd owned in years, and a note in careful script, "For not making do, C.W." Supper that night was quieter than usual. Sarah picked at her food. Margaret sensed the tension and fidgeted. Finally, Cassian set down his fork. "I heard what happened in town," he said. "People talk. They always have, always will. But what matters is what happens in this house." He looked at each of his daughters in turn. "Miss Ada is here because we need help and she needs work. That's all anyone needs to know." "But Mary Jenkins," Margaret began. "Mary Jenkins doesn't live in this house. We do." His voice was firm but gentle. "And in this house, we treat each other with respect and kindness. Miss Ada has shown us both. We owe her the same." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Yes, Papa." "Good. Now, I believe Miss Ada bought something sweet in town." The peppermint sticks worked their magic, and bedtime came with less resistance than usual. But as Ada cleaned the kitchen, she heard Sarah's voice from the other room. "Papa, do you miss Mama?" "Every day, little bird, every single day." "Good," Sarah said fiercely. "Don't ever stop." "I won't, I promise." Later, as had become custom, Ada heard Cassian take up his nightly vigil, but this time, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and ventured out. "Couldn't sleep," she said softly. He nodded, unsurprised. "Town trips tend to have that effect." She settled on the bench, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Harmon mentioned she was Elizabeth's cousin. Did she?" His tone was dry. "I'm sure she had plenty to say." "She said Elizabeth found you difficult to warm." To her surprise, he chuckled a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how. "Beth said I courted her like I was building a fence, straight lines, proper corners, no deviation from the plan." His smile was distant, remembering. "Took her 2 years to teach me that some things can't be built to specification." "She sounds remarkable." "She was," simple words, weighted with loss. "Sarah's like her in spirit, though she'd deny it. That fire, that fierceness. Margaret has her joy." He paused. "They're all I have left of her." "No," Ada said gently. "You have more than that. You have the home she made warm, the love she taught you to show, the family she helped build. Those don't die." He turned to look at her fully then, lamplight catching the planes of his face. You speak as someone who knows. My mother was a seamstress. After she died, I couldn't sew for months. Then one day I realized every stitch I knew. She'd taught me, every time I hemmed a dress or mended a tear. She was there in the movement of my hands. Ada looked down at those hands, work-worn but steady. The dead stay with us in what they taught us to do. Silence stretched between them. Comfortable now. Finally. Cassian spoke. Beth would have liked you. Even though I can't warm stones. He almost smiled. Especially because you don't try to, you just work around them. Like water finding its way. It was the longest conversation they'd had. And somehow, Ada knew it would be the last of its kind for a while. Too much had been said. Too much felt. Tomorrow they would return to careful distances and practical matters. But tonight, sitting in companionable silence while the wind tested the windows and the fire slowly died, something had shifted. Not warming stones. No, but perhaps showing that some things didn't need warming to be valuable. "Don't watch me sleep," she said as she rose to return to her room. The words now become almost a joke between them. "I wasn't," he replied. But this time he added, "I was watching you wake." The cellar had been Elizabeth's domain. Cassian mentioned once in passing. Ada discovered why the day she ventured down the wooden steps in search of preserves. Neat rows of jars lined handmade shelves, each labeled in precise script, plum butter, August 1871, and green beans, September 1871. 2 years old now, the last harvest Elizabeth would ever put up. But in the corner, covered by an oilcloth and forgotten beneath dusty mason jars, sat something that made Ada's heart skip. A Singer sewing machine, its black body dulled with disuse but otherwise intact. Beside it, a basket of fabric scraps and half-finished projects, as if Elizabeth had just stepped away and might return any moment. Ada ran her fingers over the machine's wheel, testing its movement. A bit of oil, some cleaning, and it would work again. The thought sent an unexpected thrill through her, not just for the machine itself, but for what it could mean. Real thread from town was one thing, but this could transform their making do into making new. "Miss Ada," Margaret's voice drifted down the stairs. "Papa says supper." "Coming?" She carefully recovered the machine, but her mind was already spinning with possibilities. That evening, she waited until the girls were absorbed in their slates before broaching the subject. "I found something in the cellar today." Cassian looked up from the harness he was mending. "Oh, a sewing machine. Would it be, that is, might I use it?" His hands stilled. Sarah's pencil stopped moving. Even Margaret looked up from her careful letters. "It was Mama's," Sarah said unnecessarily. "I know." Ada kept her voice gentle. "I wouldn't presume if it weren't needed, but the girls are growing so fast, and their clothes." She trailed off, letting the evidence speak for itself. Margaret's sleeves ended 2 inches above her wrists. Sarah's skirt showed more patch than original fabric. Cassian set down the harness. "Show me." They descended to the cellar together, the girls trailing behind like anxious shadows. Ada pulled away the oilcloth, revealing Elizabeth's forgotten corner. Sarah made a small sound, reaching for a half-finished sampler in the basket. "I remember this," she whispered. "She was teaching me cross-stitch." Cassian stared at the machine as if it might speak. "Finally," he said. "Can you get it working?" "I believe so. The mechanism seems sound." "Then use it." He turned away. No point in letting useful things go to waste. But Ada caught the tightness in his jaw, the careful way he didn't look at the basket of Elizabeth's unfinished work. It took 3 days to clean and oil the machine properly. Ada set it up in a corner of the main room where the light was best, aware of how it changed the space, this piece of Elizabeth's life suddenly present again. The girls watched her work with fascination, tinged with something harder to name. "Mama used to sing when she sewed," Margaret offered one afternoon. What did she sing? Church songs mostly, sometimes funny ones about frogs. Sarah, who'd been pretending not to watch, suddenly spoke. She sang Sweet By and By. It was her favorite. Ada's hands paused on the fabric. Do you remember the words? Sarah shook her head, but Margaret piped up. I do well, some of them. She began in her clear child's voice. There's a land that is fairer than day. By the second line, Sarah had joined in, her voice tentative but true. Ada hummed along, not knowing the words but feeling the melody settle into the rhythm of the machine. Word spread as word does in small communities. First, Mrs. Carlson from the neighboring ranch brought a torn Sunday jacket. Heard you had Elizabeth's machine running again, she said, pretending she hadn't ridden 5 miles for a simple mend. Then came Mrs. Patterson with curtains that needed hemming. Young Mrs. Ellis with a baby dress to be let out. Ada charged modest fees what people could afford, sometimes taking payment in eggs or preserves. The money went into the household jar, but the real payment was in the gradual shift in the house itself. The machine's steady rhythm became part of their days. Neighbors stopped viewing her with suspicion and started seeing her as useful, even necessary. One evening, Thomas Hartley arrived with his daughter Emma, a girl about Sarah's age. Begging pardon, he said, hat in hand. But Emma's got a recital at church come Sunday. And her good dress. He held up a blue frock with a tremendous tear down the side. Of course, Ada said. Emma, why don't you play with the girls while I work? The children disappeared outside despite the cold, their laughter drifting through the walls. Thomas lingered, watching Ada's efficient movements. Mighty kind of Cassian to let you use Beth's machine, he said finally. It needed using. Still, he shifted uncomfortably. Beth was particular about that machine, saved 2 years to buy it, said it was her independence. Ada's hand slowed. Independence. She took in sewing work too, said a woman should have her own money, even married. He colored slightly. Not that Cassian didn't provide. He's a good man, just Beth had ideas about things. After he left, Ada sat before the machine, seeing it differently. Not just a tool, but a statement. Elizabeth had carved out her own space in this male world, stitch by stitch. And now Ada was doing the same, using Elizabeth's tools to build her own small independence. You're thinking too loud, Cassian said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. Mr. Hartley was just telling me about the machine, how Elizabeth saved for it. 2 years and 3 months, he confirmed. Sold eggs, took in mending before she had the machine, saved every penny. I offered to buy it for her, but she refused, said it would mean more if she earned it herself. She was a remarkable woman. Yes, he moved into the room, studied the blue dress Ada was mending. You're remarkable too, in different ways. Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm just making do know. He shook his head. You're making new. The girls laugh again. The house smells like bread instead of dust. People stop by who haven't been here since. He trailed off, then continued more firmly. You're not trying to be her. That's what makes it bearable. I couldn't be her if I tried. No, he agreed. But you're becoming yourself, and that's good. It's good. He left before she could respond, but his words lingered like warmth from a stove. That night, she worked late, finishing Emma's dress and starting alterations on a skirt for Sarah. The machine hummed its steady song, and Ada found herself humming along not Elizabeth's hymns, but her own mother's lullabies, the threads of past and present weaving together. Margaret wandered out in her nightgown. Can't sleep, she announced, climbing onto Ada's lap despite the awkward angle. Bad dream. No, just thinking. She watched Ada's hands guide the fabric. Will you teach me like Mama was teaching Sarah? If your father allows it. He will. Margaret spoke with the confidence of a beloved youngest child. He likes when we're happy. And sewing makes you happy. No, Margaret yawned. But learning does. Mama said learning meant you'd never be bored or helpless. More of Elizabeth's wisdom, preserved in her children like flowers pressed between pages. Ada adjusted Margaret's weight, continued sewing one-handed. Your mama was right. Shall we start tomorrow? Margaret nodded sleepily. Can we sing the frog song? If you teach it to me. Deal. The child snuggled closer. Miss Ada, I'm glad you found Mama's machine. So am I, sweetheart. I think she would be too. It was too quiet before. Soon Margaret's breathing deepened into sleep. Ada continued sewing, the machine's rhythm mixing with the child's soft snores and the wind's lullaby. This corner of the room had become hers, not replacing Elizabeth's space, but creating a new one, stitch by careful stitch. When Cassian emerged for his nightly vigil, he found them there, Ada working steadily, Margaret boneless with sleep in her lap. He stood for a long moment, taking in the scene, then quietly lifted his daughter. Don't stop on my account, he said softly. The sound is pleasant. So Ada continued working while he settled into his chair, the machine's hum joining the night sounds of the house. Sometimes he read, sometimes he simply sat, but always he stayed until she finished, walking her to her door with a quiet sleep well. The machine had given her more than just useful work. It had given her a place in the rhythm of this home, a sound that belonged here as surely as Sarah's pencil scratching or Margaret's chatter. Not Elizabeth's sound that had been different, colored by different dreams and sorrows. This was Ada's sound, the steady beat of building something new from the pieces left behind. The cemetery sat on a rise north of town, wind-scoured and sparse, marked by wooden crosses and the occasional stone marker. Ada hadn't meant to follow Cassian that Sunday morning. She'd been walking off a restlessness that sometimes seized her, and her feet had simply carried her up the familiar path. Only when she crested the hill did she see him, hat in hand beside a well-tended grave. She froze, uncertain whether to retreat or announce herself. The decision was taken from her when a woman's voice cut through the morning air. Cassian Ward, I might have known I'd find you here. Ada recognized Mrs. Prudence Hawley before she saw her Elizabeth's cousin from the general store, dressed in black bombazine despite the spring weather. Two other women flanked her like carrion birds, all sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Mrs. Hawley. Cassian's voice was carefully neutral. Ladies. Don't you ladies us? Prudence marched forward, her companions rustling behind. It's been 6 months since I've seen you or the girls at Sunday service. And now I hear you've got that woman living in your house, bold as brass. Miss Marlowe is caring for my daughters. Is that what they're calling it now? One of the other women, Mrs. Donovan. Ada thought sniffed disdainfully. In my day, we had other words for women who lived with widowed men. Heat flooded Ada's face, but before she could step forward, Cassian spoke, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You'll mind your tongue, Mrs. Donovan. I'll not have Miss Marlowe's character questioned by those who measure virtue by attendance at their particular pew. How dare you, Prudence began, but he cut her off. My wife lies here because the church she loved turned its back when she needed help most. His words were controlled, but Ada could see the tension in his shoulders. When she was dying, where were you? Where was Christian charity when my girls were crying for their mother? That's not... Miss Marlowe came to a household of strangers because duty called her to it. She's shown my daughters more kindness in 3 months than this town showed them in 2 years of grieving. He placed his hat back on his head. A clear dismissal. Good day, ladies. You can't just... I said good day. The women retreated in a flutter of indignation. Prudence's voice carrying back, You'll regret this, Cassian Ward. That woman has designs on you. Mark my words. She's no better than she should be, coming from God knows where. Ada stepped out from behind the cottonwood where she'd taken shelter. Cassian didn't seem surprised to see her. How much did you hear? Enough. She moved closer. drawn by something in his stance, not defeat, exactly, but a bone-deep weariness. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause—" "Stop." He turned to face her fully. "You've caused nothing. Prudence has been sharpening that particular axe since long before you arrived. Because of Elizabeth. Because Elizabeth chose me instead of Prudence's brother. Because Beth refused to host their temperance meetings. Because she laughed too loud and spoke her mind and wore her hair loose on Saturdays." He looked back at the grave, where early wildflowers struggled through stubborn snow, mostly because she was happy, and Prudence couldn't forgive that. Ada studied the headstone. Elizabeth Ward, beloved wife and mother, 1,850 to 1,872 inches. Such simple words for what sounded like an extraordinary life. "The church turned its back?" she asked softly. "When Beth took sick, Reverend Morrison, not Matthew. The one before said it was God's judgment for her willfulness, preached about Eve's curse while she was dying." His laugh was bitter. "Matthew tried to make amends when he came, but by then the damage was done." "Yes." He knelt, brushing dried leaves from the grave. "I haven't set foot in that building since her funeral. Won't have my girls told their mother deserved to die for being joyful." Ada watched him tend the grave with careful hands. This man who kept vigil over everything that mattered to him. "Is that why you were so quick to hire me, an outsider with no connections to the church?" "Partly." He stood, dusting his knees. "Also because you looked at my girls and saw children who needed care, not objects of pity or gossip. That's rarer than you might think." They stood together in comfortable silence, the wind tugging at Ada's shawl and loosening tendrils from her careful bun. Finally, Cassian spoke again. "Prudence will make trouble. She has influence with certain families in town. I've weathered worse." "Have you?" He studied her face. "You never speak of your past." Ada considered deflecting, as she always did, but here, in this place of endings and honesty, the words came unbidden. "My mother died when I was 13. My father handled his grief poorly. With drink, mostly. Then with debt. Then with disappearing entirely, leaving me to manage creditors who thought a young girl might pay in other ways than money." Cassian's expression darkened. "Ada, I learned to sew 12 hours a day, to sleep light, to keep moving when staying became dangerous." She wrapped her arms around herself. "So yes, I've weathered worse than Prudence Hawley's disapproval." "Is that why you begged me not to watch that first night you thought I might?" "I didn't know what to think. I was fevered, alone, and a strange man was sitting by my bed. Old fears don't ask permission before rising." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, deliberately, he stepped back, putting more distance between them. "I would never." "I know that now. Knew it quite quickly. Actually, you're the first man to see I needed watching over, not watching. Everyone needs watching over sometimes." His voice was gruff. "Even those who've learned to manage alone." A sound from the path made them both turn. Sarah and Margaret were climbing the hill, Margaret chattering about the flowers she'd picked, Sarah moving with her usual careful grace. "Papa," Margaret ran forward. "We came to see Mama." "So I see." He caught her before she could barrel into the headstone. "Mind the graves, magpie." Sarah hung back, eyeing Ada warily. "Mrs. Henderson said she saw Mrs. Hawley heading this way. Said she looked ready to spit nails." Mrs. Henderson says many things." Cassian replied mildly. "Have you brought flowers for your mother?" The girls arranged their wildflowers while Ada stepped away, giving them privacy. But Margaret called out, "Miss Ada, do you want to leave flowers too?" "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't know your mother. It wouldn't be—" "She would have liked you," Margaret insisted. "Papa said so, and I bet she'd like flowers from someone who makes us smile." Ada looked to Cassian, who nodded slightly. So she selected a small primrose from Margaret's bouquet and placed it carefully beside the others. "There," Margaret said with satisfaction. Now Mama knows about you. Sarah shot her sister a look, but said nothing. As they prepared to leave, however, she fell into step beside Ada. Mrs. Holly's mean, she said quietly. She used to make Mama cry sometimes. I'm sorry to hear that. Mama said mean people are usually scared people, but I don't know what Mrs. Holly's scared of. Ada thought of Prudence's pinched face, the desperate righteousness in her voice. Maybe she's scared of joy she doesn't understand. Some people are like that. They see happiness and think it must be hiding something dark. Sarah considered this. Is that why she doesn't like you, because we're happy again? The question stopped Ada short. Were they happy? She thought of Margaret's laughter, Sarah's growing trust, Cassian's quiet contentment in the evenings. Perhaps not the same happiness they'd known with Elizabeth, but something new growing in its place. Maybe, she said finally, but that's her burden to carry, not ours. Sarah nodded slowly, then surprised Ada by taking her hand. They walked home that way. The four of them spread across the path, Cassian carrying Margaret, who'd grown tired. Sarah holding Ada's hand with careful trust, like a bird deciding to light. That evening, as Ada finished the supper dishes, a knock came at the door. Cassian answered to find Mrs. Henderson, Thomas Hartley, and several other neighbors. Evening, Cassian, Thomas said. Heard Prudence Holly was stirring up trouble at the cemetery. Thought we'd stop by, let you know not everyone shares her opinion. Mrs. Henderson pushed forward. That woman's had too much say for too long. Beth never minded her sharp tongue, but some of us are tired of it. She looked past Cassian to Ada. You need anything from town? Dear, you let me know. I'll not have Prudence making shopping difficult for you. One by one, the neighbors offered support quietly, practically, in the manner of frontier people who understood that survival often depended on standing together against those who would divide. After they left, Cassian found Ada on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Seems you've made more friends than enemies, he said, settling beside her on the bench. Your friends, not mine. No. His voice was firm. They came for you. Beth would have. He stopped, started again. Beth would have done the same thing, stood up for what's right. Consequences be damned. I'm not trying to be her, Ada said softly, echoing his words from weeks ago. I know, but you're honoring her memory in your own way, by caring for what she loved, by not letting fear or meanness drive you off. He stood, headed for the door, then paused. That grave I go every Sunday. You're welcome to come, if you like. The girls would appreciate it. And you? He looked back at her, something unguarded in his expression. I'd appreciate it too. Gets lonely sometimes, remembering alone. Then he was gone, leaving Ada under stars that seemed unusually bright. In the house, she heard the comforting sounds of bedtime, Margaret bargaining for one more story, Sarah's quiet questions, Cassian's patient responses. The storm struck without warning on a Tuesday evening. One moment the sky held only winter's usual gray. The next, snow fell in sheets so thick Ada couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. Cassian had ridden out that morning to check the western pastures, promising to return by supper. Supper came and went. The girls picked at their food. Margaret's chatter subdued. Sarah's silence deeper than usual. Ada kept the stew warm on the stove, added wood to the fire, and tried not to watch the windows. He's sheltering somewhere, she told the girls as she tucked them into bed. Your father knows this land better than anyone. He'll wait out the storm. But what if he's hurt? Margaret's voice was small. What if his horse threw him like when Mama... Your mother's accident was different, Ada said firmly, though she didn't know the details. Your father is careful. He'll be home when it's safe. Sarah said nothing, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her quilt. Ada sat between their beds, humming softly until both girls finally dozed. Then she returned to the main room and her own vigil. The hours crawled. She mended everything that needed mending, started a new shirt for Cassian from fabric bought with her sewing money, read the same page of her Bible 3 times without comprehending a word. The storm raged against the walls like something alive and hungry. Near midnight, she heard it something heavy hitting the door. Ada flew to open it, and Cassian practically fell inside, more ice than man. His coat was frozen solid, his hat lost, blood seeping from a gash above his left eye. "Horse, spooked," he managed through chattering teeth. "Had to walk, got turned around." Ada didn't waste time on questions. She barred the door against the wind, guided him to the chair by the fire. His hands were so cold they couldn't work the buttons of his coat. She had to cut it off him, her mother's sewing scissors slicing through frozen wool. "The girls?" he asked. "Asleep. Worried, but asleep." She peeled away layers, coat, vest, shirt all stiff with ice. The wound on his temple was deep, but clean. "This needs tending." "Later. Need to warm up first." But his words slurred, and she recognized the dangerous drowsiness of severe cold. "No, stay awake. Talk to me." "About what?" "Anything. Tell me about the ranch, the cattle, how you met Elizabeth." Anything to keep him conscious while she worked. His laugh was more breath than sound. "Beth, she was visiting her cousin, Prudence, came to church in a yellow dress that made her look like sunshine." Ada heated water, gathered clean cloth and the bottle of carbolic from the medicine shelf. His skin was too pale, his breathing too shallow. "Keep talking," she ordered, pressing a warm cloth to the wound. He hissed at the contact. "I couldn't speak to her, just stared like a fool. She had to introduce herself." His eyes drifted closed. "Said I looked like I'd swallowed my tongue." "Eyes open." Ada's voice was sharper than intended. "What happened next?" "She laughed. Not mean, just bright. Like everything she did." He forced his eyes open, tried to focus on Ada's face. "You don't laugh much." "I haven't had much cause." She cleaned the wound carefully, trying not to think about how much blood stained the cloth. "There, it needs stitching, but the bleeding slowed." "You can sew skin." "I've had practice." Memories she'd rather forget Baltimore alleys. Desperate people. Skills learned from necessity. "This will hurt." "Can't hurt worse than—" He broke off as the needle pierced skin, his whole body tensing. "Never mind." She worked quickly, making small, precise stitches while he gripped the chair arms. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the lingering chill. When she finished, his breathing was ragged but his color better. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Should change. Need dry clothes?" "Not yet. You're shaking too hard." She draped a quilt around his shoulders. Then did something that would have scandalized proper society. She sat on the floor at his feet and wrapped her arms around his legs, sharing what warmth she could. "Ada, you shouldn't—" "Hush. We're past propriety when it comes to keeping you alive." She pressed her cheek against his knee, felt the tremors running through him. "Tell me more about Elizabeth. How did you court her?" "Badly." His hand found her hair, fingers tangling in the pins. She should have pulled away, but didn't. Brought her flowers that made her sneeze, tried to impress her with horse tricks and fell in the mud. "But she married you anyway." "Said she liked that I tried so hard, that I didn't pretend to be smooth." His voice was getting stronger, the shaking less violent. "Said she'd rather have honest fumbling than practiced charm." They stayed that way, her arms around his legs, his hand in her hair, while the storm battered the house and the fire slowly won its battle against the cold. Finally, his tremors stilled. "I should check your feet," Ada said, pulling back. "Frostbite's a danger." His boots came off with difficulty, the leather stiff with cold. His feet were pale, but not the telltale white of severe damage. She rubbed them carefully, bringing back circulation while he sucked in sharp breaths. "Where did you learn this?" "A doctor in Baltimore. I helped him sometimes, when people couldn't pay." She kept her eyes on her work. "He taught me what he could." "Is that where you learned to be so careful, Baltimore?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Ada," he waited until she looked up. "I'm sorry for whatever drove you from there, but I'm grateful it brought you here." The simple words undid her. Tears she hadn't shed in years threatened to spill. "Don't, I'm just—" "If you say making do, I'll stand up and fall over to prove you wrong." Despite everything, there was gentle humor in his voice. "You saved my life tonight. That's considerably more than making do." A small sound from the doorway made them both turn. Sarah stood there, face pale in the firelight, Margaret behind her. "Papa!" Sarah's voice broke on the word. "I'm all right, little bird. Just got caught in the storm." He held out an arm, and both girls flew to him, careful of his injuries. "Miss Ada fixed him," Margaret announced after assessing the situation. "Like she fixes everything." "Not everything," Ada said softly. But Margaret was already chattering about the blood and the stitches and how brave Papa was. Sarah, though, watched Ada with those two knowing eyes. Later, after Cassian had changed into dry clothes and the girls had been settled back to bed with reassurances, Ada found herself alone with him again. He sat at the table, exhausted but refusing to sleep. "I keep thinking," he said slowly. "What would have happened if you weren't here?" "Someone else would have—" "No." His voice was firm. "Mrs. Henderson would have put the girls to bed and gone home. They'd have been alone when I didn't return. Alone when I finally made it back. If I made it back." "But you did make it back. Because you were here. Because you knew what to do." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something shifted in his expression. "That first night, in the doctor's office, you begged me not to watch you sleep. I remember. I understand now. Being that vulnerable, that dependent." He touched the bandage on his temple. "It's terrifying." "Yes, but you didn't leave, even terrified, even hurt. You stayed and let strangers help you." "I had nowhere else to go," she reminded him. "Neither did I tonight. Nowhere but here. Home." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. "You asked once why I watch over things. It's because I failed to watch when it mattered most. Beth went riding alone. I was busy with calving. Told her to wait. She didn't. Horse threw her. By the time we found her, Cassian, she was still alive. Barely. Lived 3 more days. Long enough to say goodbye." His voice was steady, but his hands clenched on the table. "I swore I'd never fail to watch over my family again. Then tonight, I nearly left them alone again." "But you didn't," Ada said firmly. "You fought through a killing storm to get home. That's not failing, that's the very opposite." He studied her face. "Is that how you see it?" "That's how they'll see it," she said, nodding toward the girls' room. "Their father, who loved them enough to walk through hell to come home." "And you, how do you see it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ada thought of the terror that had gripped her when he fell through the door, the relief that had weakened her knees, the strange intimacy of holding him while he shook with cold. "I see a man who keeps his promises," she said finally, "even when it costs him everything." He reached out, covered her hand with his. His fingers were warm now, calloused from years of hard work. "Thank you, for tonight, for everything since you arrived." "Don't watch me sleep," she whispered, the old phrase taking new meaning. "I wasn't," he replied softly. "I was watching you save us." She should have pulled her hand away, should have retreated to proper distances. Instead, she turned her palm up, let their fingers intertwine just for a moment. Outside, the storm was breaking, wind dying to whispers. Inside, something new was being born, fragile as spring ice but just as inevitable. "You should rest," she said finally, gently withdrawing her hand. "That wound needs time to heal." "I'll sit up a while longer, make sure the storm's truly past." She rose, understanding. He needed his ritual, his watch, especially after coming so close to failing it. At her door, she paused. "Cassian, don't watch me sleep, but I'm glad you're watching over us." His smile was tired but real. "Always," he said simply. "Always." The monthly meeting of the Ladies' Aid Society took place in the church basement, a space that smelled of old hymnals and lemon oil. Ada had avoided it for 4 months. But Mrs. Henderson finally wore down her resistance. "Just this once," the older woman had pleaded. "We're planning the spring social, and we need someone with your skills to handle the decorations." So Ada found herself descending the wooden steps on a Thursday afternoon, arms full of fabric samples and stomach full of dread. The conversation died as she entered, a dozen pairs of eyes turning her way like flowers following the sun, if flowers could judge and whisper. "Miss Marlowe?" Prudence Hawley's voice could have frozen July. "How unexpected. Mrs. Henderson invited me," Ada said quietly, finding a seat near the door. "Did she now?" Prudence's smile was sharp as glass. "Well, we were just discussing the propriety of certain living arrangements in our Christian community." Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, shifted uncomfortably. "Prudence, perhaps we should focus on the social. Christian values are always relevant." "Constance." Prudence's eyes never left Ada. "Don't you agree? Miss Marlowe, or is morality something you left behind in— Where was it you came from? Baltimore, I believe?" "Yes," Ada kept her voice steady. "I came from Baltimore." "And what brought you west? Family, a husband, perhaps?" The questions came like needles, each one precisely aimed. "Work, Mrs. Hawley, as you well know." "Ah, yes, work." Prudence drew out the word. "Such noble work, keeping house for a widower, though some might say a young woman should be more careful about appearances. Living alone with a man, even with children present." "That's enough. Prudence." "Mrs." Henderson's voice cut through like a cleaver. "Miss Marlowe has been nothing but proper and helpful to this community." "Has she?" Prudence stood, moving closer. "Then perhaps she'd like to explain why she was seen in her night clothes, embracing Mr. Ward during the last storm." Gasps rippled through the room. Ada felt heat flood her face as she realized someone must have seen through the window that night her on the floor, arms around Cassian's legs, trying to warm him. "He was near frozen to death," she said quietly. "I did what was necessary to save his life." "How convenient. And I suppose it was necessary to run your fingers through his hair as well." "Prudence Hawley, you poisonous witch, Mrs." Henderson was on her feet now. "That man would have died if not for Miss Marlowe's quick thinking." "So she claims, but who's to say what really happened?" A storm, an empty house, a man and woman alone. Prudence's implication hung in the air like smoke. Ada stood slowly, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You're right, Mrs. Hawley. You weren't there. You didn't see him stumble through the door more dead than alive. You didn't watch his lips turn blue, or feel how his hands couldn't even work buttons. You didn't have to choose between propriety and watching 2 little girls wake up orphans." "How dare you?" "I dare because I was there." Ada's voice grew stronger. "Just as I've been there every day since, cooking meals and mending clothes and teaching lessons. Being what those girls need, not a replacement for their mother, but someone who ensures they're fed and clean and loved." "Loved?" Prudence's laugh was ugly. "Is that what you call it, setting your cap for a grieving widower?" "No." The voice from the doorway was quiet, but carried absolute authority. "That's what I call it." Every head turned. Cassian stood at the foot of the stairs, hat in hand, face carved from stone. Behind him, Sarah and Margaret peered around his legs. "Papa," Margaret started forward, but Sarah caught her arm, sensing the tension. "Mr. Ward." Prudence recovered first. "This is a ladies' meeting." "So I see. Yet you're discussing my household, my family." He stepped fully into the room. "Perhaps you'd like to air your concerns directly." We were simply discussing Christian propriety." "Were you?" His gaze swept the room, and several women looked away. "Then let me be clear. Miss Marlowe saved my life during that storm. She tends my children with more care than they've known since their mother died. If that offends your Christian propriety, then perhaps you need to reread your Bible. Start with the Good Samaritan. The situations are hardly comparable." "Aren't they?" He moved closer to Prudence, who actually stepped back. A stranger helping someone in desperate need, though I suppose the Samaritan had the advantage of not having his motives questioned by those who sat warm and safe while others suffered. "Cassian Ward, your wife would be appalled." "My wife," Cassian said, his voice dropping dangerously, "would be appalled by women who claim Christian charity while spreading poison. She'd be disgusted by those who whisper about propriety while offering no help to a man raising daughters alone. But mostly, she'd be heartbroken that the church she loved has become a place where kindness is suspected and cruelty is wrapped in righteousness." Silence fell like a hammer. Margaret squirmed free of Sarah's grip and ran to Ada, wrapping her arms around her skirts. "Miss Ada helps us," she announced to the room. "She makes Papa smile sometimes and teaches Sarah pretty stitches and tells me stories. That's good, isn't it?" Several women looked ashamed. "Mrs." Patterson cleared her throat. "Of course it is, sweetheart." "Then why is everyone mad?" Margaret's innocent question hung in the air. Ada smoothed the child's hair. "Sometimes adults make things complicated that should be simple." "Well, that's silly," Margaret declared. "Out of the mouths of babes, Mrs." Henderson murmured. Prudence gathered her composure. "Regardless of intentions, the appearance of impropriety remains. As leaders in this community." "Leaders?" Cassian's laugh was harsh. "You've led nothing but gossip circles since Beth died. Where was your leadership when my girls needed comfort? Where was it when Miss Marlowe arrived, injured and alone?" He looked around the room again, meeting each woman's eyes. "She's shown more Christian charity in 4 months than this entire society has in 2 years. And if you can't see that, then perhaps it's your propriety that needs examining, not hers." Ada found her voice. "Mr. Ward, please, I should go." "No." He turned to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You should stay. You have every right to be here, to be part of this community. Don't let small minds drive you away." Big words from a man who hasn't darkened a church door in 2 years. Prudence snapped, "And I won't again, if this is what it's become." He held out his hand to Ada. "Come, the girls are hungry, and we've wasted enough time here." Ada hesitated, taking his hand publicly. Leaving with him, it would confirm every suspicion, fan every flame of gossip. But Margaret was tugging her skirt, and Sarah watched from the doorway with hopeful eyes. And really, what did she have to lose that hadn't already been taken by whispers? She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and together they walked to the door. But there, Ada turned back. "I came here," she said quietly, "because Mrs. Henderson asked for help with decorations. I brought fabric samples and thread, willing to contribute what skills I have. Instead, I found judgment and suspicion. You talk of Christian values while practicing cruelty. You speak of propriety while showing no compassion." She lifted her chin. "Keep your society. I'll keep my conscience clear." They left in silence, climbing the stairs into afternoon sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after the basement's gloom. Only when they reached the wagon did Cassian release her hand. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't have." "Yes, you should have." Ada helped Margaret into the wagon bed. "Thank you." "I meant what I said. You have every right." "I know." She accepted his help onto the wagon seat. "But rights and welcome are different things." Sarah climbed up beside her, surprising them both. Usually she sat with Margaret in back. "They're wrong," the girl said fiercely. "All of them. You belong here, with us." Ada's throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart." "It's not thanks," Sarah said. "It's true, isn't it, Papa?" Cassian looked at his elder daughter, then at Ada. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true." They rode home in companionable silence, Margaret humming in the back, Sarah leaning ever so slightly against Ada's arm. The sun was warm, the sky endless, and, for the first time, Ada didn't think about the whispers they'd left behind. That evening, as she served supper, a knock came at the door. Cassian answered to find Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Patterson, and 3 other women from the meeting. "May we come in, Mrs.?" Henderson asked. They filed in quietly, some looking ashamed, others defiant. "Mrs." Patterson spoke first. "Miss Marlowe, we owe you an apology. Prudence had no right to speak to you that way." "She's not here, Mrs." Henderson added dryly. "Seems she had urgent business elsewhere when we suggested making amends." "You don't owe me anything," Ada said carefully. "Yes, we do." This from young Mrs. Ellis, whose baby dress Ada had altered. "You've helped all of us, asked for nothing but fair payment, and we sat there like cowards while Prudence attacked you." "Fear makes cowards of many," Ada said, thinking of her own years of running. "Well, we're done being afraid," Mrs. Henderson declared. "Prudence Hawley's held this town's morals hostage long enough. If she wants to make your presence here an issue, she'll find herself a minority." They didn't stay long, just enough to make their position clear, to extend tentative offers of friendship. After they left, Ada found herself standing at the back of the empty church. "No, not empty." Cassian stood by the last pew, hat in hand, looking at the altar with an unreadable expression. "I haven't been inside since her funeral," he said without turning. "Swore I never would be again." "What changed?" "You did." He faced her then, standing up to them, speaking truth in their own territory. Beth would have done the same thing. "I'm not—" "I know you're not her. That's not what I mean." He moved closer. "She'd have liked your backbone, your quiet way of fighting, the way you stand at the edges until someone needs you, then step forward without hesitation. Is that how you see me?" "That's how you are." He gestured to the empty pews. "This place took something from me, from my girls, but maybe it doesn't have to own that forever." Ada understood. Places could be reclaimed, just like lives. The girls might like Sunday school, Margaret especially. "Would you come if they went?" "If you'd like me to." "I would." Simple words, but they carried weight. I think it's time to stop letting ghosts dictate where we can stand." The fire had been dying for an hour, casting long shadows across the main room. Outside, April rain drummed against the windows, not the harsh assault of winter storms, but spring's gentler persistence. The girls had been asleep since 8, worn out from helping Ada plant the kitchen garden. Ada sat by the hearth, mending one of Cassian's work shirts by lamplight. He occupied his usual chair, pretending to read the week-old newspaper from town, but mostly watching the flames. These evening hours had become sacred in their quiet companionship, no need for words, just the comfort of another presence as day settled into night. "That's the 3rd time you've sewn that same seam," he observed. She looked down, startled to find he was right. Her mind had been wandering, circling the same thought that had plagued her for weeks now. 6 months she'd been here, 6 months of careful distances slowly shrinking, of a temporary arrangement that felt less temporary each day. Wool gathering, she admitted, setting the shirt aside. About... She hesitated, then spoke the truth. About time, how it passes, what happens when it runs out. Are you going somewhere? His voice was carefully neutral, but she saw his hands tighten on the newspaper. No, sometimes I remember this was meant to be temporary. Until you found someone permanent, someone proper. Proper. He set the paper down, leaned forward. Like Prudence Hawley, like the good Christian women who whispered while my daughters grieved. You know that's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? There was an edge to his voice now, not anger, but something rawer. Tell me what proper looks like, Ada, because from where I sit, proper is warm meals and mended clothes. It's Margaret laughing again and Sarah trusting someone new. It's... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. It's coming home to lighten the windows. Cassian. I still see her sometimes. The admission came quiet, unexpected. Beth. In dreams, mostly, but lately. He looked at her then, firelight catching the uncertainty in his eyes. Lately, I see you too, and I don't know what that means, except that maybe a heart can hold more than one truth at a time. Ada's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, the lingering glances, the careful touches that lasted a moment too long, the way the house had shaped itself around her presence until leaving seemed impossible. I dream too, she whispered. Not of faces, but of staying, of belonging somewhere so completely that leaving would tear me in half. She met his gaze. It terrifies me. Why? Because I've never had it before. Because I don't know if it's real or just another temporary shelter I've talked myself into believing is home. He rose, crossed to her chair, knelt so they were eye level, this close. She could see the silver threading through his hair, the lines carved by sun and sorrow, the careful hope in his expression. It's real, he said simply. As real as breakfast dishes and bedtime stories. As real as Sarah asking you to braid her hair like her mother used to. But different because it's you doing it. As real as Margaret insisting you need to learn to ride because how else will you come with us to check fences? She said that yesterday, while you were hanging laundry, his hand found hers, calloused thumb tracing her knuckles. They're not the only ones who've been making plans that include you. What kind of plans? Her voice came out breathless. The kind where I add another room to the house, where I teach you to ride so you can come with us to town without the wagon, where... He paused, swallowed. Where I stop pretending I'm not falling in love with you. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ada felt her careful defenses crumbling, all the walls she'd built against hope and disappointment. I can't be her, she whispered. I can't fill those spaces. I'm not asking you to. His grip on her hand tightened. I'm asking you to make new spaces. Yours, ours. Different from what came before, but not less precious for it. What about the girls? What if they already love you, in their own ways, in their own time, but it's there. He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her palm. The question is whether you can love us back, not as replacements for what you've lost, but as we are complicated and grieving and trying to build something new from broken pieces. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I already do. That's what terrifies me. I love Margaret's stories and Sarah's quiet strength. I love how you read to them every night, how you check the locks twice before bed, how you still can't make coffee worth drinking, but try anyway. She freed her hand to touch his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. I love how you watch over everything that matters to you. And somewhere between that first night and now, I became one of those things. Didn't I? Yes. Simple, honest, devastating. Does that scare you? Yes, but not as much as the thought of leaving. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. I'm tired of running. Cassian, tired of making do. I want to make a life instead, here, with you all. He pulled back just enough to see her face. Then stay. Not as the help, not as a temporary solution, but as family, as... He stopped, started again. I'm not good with words. Beth always said I was better with actions than speeches. Then show me, Ada whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she might disappear. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the connection. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. I should tell the girls, he said, properly. Make sure they understand. Tomorrow. Ada touched his lips, felt him smile. Tonight, just sit with me, watch the fire die. Let me get used to the idea that I'm allowed to want this. He settled beside her on the floor, back against her chair, her hand in his hair. The rain continued its spring song, and the fire painted shadows on the walls, and everything that needed saying had been said. Don't watch me sleep, she murmured after a while, the old phrase warm with new meaning. I won't, he replied, pressing her hand. I'll be too busy planning where to build that new room. She laughed, really laughed, for perhaps the first time since arriving. Ambitious. Practical. Can't have my wife sleeping in the kitchen pantry. The word hung in the air, wife. Not a question. Not quite, but a possibility given voice. Is that what we're doing? She asked softly. If you'll have us, me and the girls and this drafty house and all the ghosts we carry? He turned to look up at her. I'm not an easy man. Ada, I think too much, speak too little. I'll never be romantic or smooth with words. But I'll work every day to make you glad you stayed, to give you the home you've been looking for since your mother died. You already have, she whispered. Every meal we've shared, every evening by the fire, every time you've trusted me with your daughters, you've been building it without knowing. Then maybe we've been building it together. Maybe we have. They sat in comfortable silence until the rain stopped and the fire was just embers. Finally, Cassian stood, pulled her to her feet. I should check the girls. I'll come. Together they looked in on Margaret, sprawled across her bed like a starfish, and Sarah, neat even in sleep, in the doorway. Cassian caught Ada's arm. I want to do this right, he said quietly. Court you proper, even if it's backwards. Give the girls time to adjust. Let the town get used to the idea. The town will talk regardless. Let them. His jaw set stubbornly. They'll have nothing to gossip about but a widower courting the woman who saved his family. Everything proper and respectable. Ada smiled. Since when have you cared about the town's opinion? Since I realized I want you to hold your head high as my wife, not weather whispers about rushed arrangements. He touched her cheek. You've had enough of making do, settling for less than you deserve. Let me give you a proper courtship, even if we're doing it all backwards. And if I said I don't need it, that I'd marry you tomorrow with just the girls as witnesses, then I'd say you deserve it anyway. He kissed her forehead. 6 months of Sundays, that's all I ask. Let me court you through summer into fall. Come harvest time, if you still want this backwards family, we'll make it official. You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Ward. No, he admitted, but I'm sure of you, sure of us, and that's enough to build on. She rose on her toes, kissed him sweetly. Then court me, Cassian. Show me what a proper frontier courtship looks like. Fair warning, it involves a lot of shared chores and practical gifts. Maybe a dance or two at the harvest social, if I can remember the steps. Sounds perfect, she said, meaning it. At her door, their old ritual intact, despite everything that had changed, she turned back. Don't watch me sleep, she said, but now it sounded like an endearment. Never, he promised. But I might spend some time thinking about that new room, where to put the windows to catch morning light, how to build it strong enough to last. Like everything else you build. Like everything that matters, he corrected. Good night, Ada. Good night, Cassian. She closed her door, leaned against it, listened to his footsteps moving through the house, not prowling, not standing guard against nameless fears, but simply the sound of a man settling in for the night, secure in the knowledge that what he loved was safe under his roof. Tomorrow there would be explanations for the girls, plans to make, a courtship to navigate under the town's watchful eyes. But tonight, Ada Evelyn Marlowe lay in her narrow bed and let herself imagine a different room, one built just for her, with windows facing east and space for all the life she planned to live in it. Outside, spring rain began again, gentle as a blessing, and somewhere in the darkness, she knew Cassian lay awake too, planning their future board by board, nail by careful nail. The October wind carried hints of winter as it rustled through the newly built addition to the ward house. 6 months had passed since that night by the dying fire. 6 months of careful courtship conducted under the watchful eyes of dry pine, true to his word. Cassian had courted her properly Sunday drives, supervised visits, small gifts of practical beauty, a new thimble, sturdy boots for riding, a leather-bound journal for her thoughts. Now Ada stood in what would soon be their room, running her hand along the window frame Cassian had carved with subtle flowering vines. The glass caught the late afternoon light, throwing patterns across the fresh-planed floor. Tomorrow, she would stand before Reverend Matthews Young and nothing like his predecessor and promise to bind her life to this place. These people. "Miss Ada?" Sarah's voice came from the doorway. Though she'd grown 3 inches and her face had lost some of its pinched wariness, she still moved with characteristic care. "Papa says supper's ready." "Tell him I'll be right there." But Sarah lingered, studying the empty room. "Mama would have liked this," she said suddenly. "The windows, especially. She always said houses needed plenty of light. Do you think she'd mind my being here?" Sarah considered this with her usual seriousness. "I used to think she would, but then I remembered something she told me once, when I asked why she married Papa even though he wasn't much for talking." The girl moved to the east window, touched the glass. "She said hearts aren't houses, they don't run out of rooms. Love makes them bigger, not smaller." Ada's throat tightened. "Your mother sounds very wise." "She was, and I think—" Sarah turned, met Ada's eyes squarely. "I think she'd be glad Papa found someone who understands about building new rooms." Then she was gone, leaving Ada alone with the gathering dusk and the certainty that Elizabeth Ward's daughter had just given her blessing in the only way that mattered. Supper was livelier than that first awkward meal 8 months ago. Margaret chattered about her role as flower girl, demonstrating her petal-throwing technique with bits of torn bread until Cassian gently stopped her. Sarah discussed the readings she'd chosen, not just scripture, but a passage from Pilgrim's Progress about finding home after long wandering. "And then dancing." Margaret bounced in her seat. "Papa's been practicing. He only stepped on Mrs. Henderson's feet twice at the last social." Margaret rose, Cassian warned, but his eyes held humor. "It's true, but Mrs. Henderson said it was an improvement over the harvest dance when you—" "That's enough about my dancing," Cassian interrupted. "Eat your carrots." After the girls were in bed, Ada found herself on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in the quilt from her narrow bed. Soon it would grace the larger bed in the new room, another piece of her temporary life woven into something permanent. Cassian joined her, as she'd known he would. These stolen moments had become precious during their courtship, always visible from the windows. Always proper, but theirs alone. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "No, just thinking about circles. How I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back and Mother's Bible. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll have considerably more, including a husband who still burns breakfast and 2 daughters who've already informed me they expect pancakes every Saturday now that you'll officially be their mother." She smiled. "Only pancakes. And new dresses for Christmas, and stories every night, and approximately 12 other requirements they've been saving up." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Sure you want this? There's still time to run. I'm done running. She leaned into his warmth. Besides, where would I go? This is home now. Good. He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch. I have something for you. A wedding gift, early. Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. Ada's breath caught. It was my grandmother's, Cassian explained. She came west in '49, built a life from nothing but determination and hope. Beth wore it for our wedding, then put it away, said it should wait for the next woman strong enough to make this land home. Cassian, I know jewelry's not practical, but sometimes impractical things matter too. He took the ring, held it up to catch the lamplight spilling from the window. Will you wear it, add your story to the ones it already carries? Yes, she whispered. He slipped it onto her right hand. The left would wait for tomorrow and witnesses. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. Don't watch me sleep, Ada murmured. Their old refrain. Never, he promised. But I might spend tonight thinking about watching you wake, tomorrow and all the mornings after. They sat in comfortable silence, the wind bringing scents of sage and snow. Inside, the house settled with familiar sounds, boards creaking, fire popping, the whisper of dreams through thin walls. I should go in, Ada said eventually. Big day tomorrow. The biggest. He stood, helped her to her feet. Ada, thank you. For what? For seeing past the stone to what could be warmed. For being patient with my clumsy courting. For loving my girls before you loved me. He touched her cheek. For teaching me that some things aren't about replacing what's lost, but about building something new in the empty spaces. She kissed him then, sweet and sure. Thank you for making space, for watching over me until I could watch over myself, for showing me that home isn't just a place, but the people who won't let you face storms alone. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost painting the windows with delicate patterns. Ada woke in her small room for the last time, dressed in the simple blue dress she and Sarah had sewn together, pinned her hair with the combs Margaret had insisted on buying with her egg money. The church was fuller than expected. News of Cassian Ward's remarriage had drawn folks from neighboring ranches, some curious, some genuinely happy to see the widower moving forward. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, beaming like a proud mother. Even Prudence Hawley had come, though she sat near the back, lips pursed but silent. Margaret practically vibrated with excitement in her new dress, scattering rose petals with enthusiastic abandon. Sarah walked with measured grace, carrying the rings on a cushion she'd embroidered herself. And Cassian waited at the altar, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit but smiling in a way that transformed his weathered face. The ceremony was simple. The vows traditional but weighted with meaning for two people who understood about loss and searching and finally finding safe harbor. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Cassian's kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise made before witnesses that had already been spoken in 100 quiet moments. The celebration after was held at the house, neighbors bringing food and music and goodwill. Thomas Hartley played his fiddle while couples danced in the main room. Furniture pushed aside for the occasion. Cassian led Ada through a careful waltz, only stepping on her feet once. See, he murmured, improvement. In all things, she agreed, letting him spin her carefully. As evening fell and guests began departing, Ada noticed Sarah slipping away toward the small cemetery plot behind the house, not the public cemetery where they'd confronted Prudence. But the private space where Elizabeth rested? She followed quietly, found the girl placing wildflowers on her mother's grave. I told her, Sarah said without turning, about you, about how Papa smiles now, about how the house feels alive again. She looked up at Ada with eyes that held tears but also peace. I told her we'd take care of each other, all of us. Ada knelt beside her, not speaking, just being present. After a moment, Sarah leaned into her side. "Is it wrong that I'm happy?" the girl whispered. "That I want you here even though it means she's really gone?" "No, sweetheart. Your mother knew about building new rooms. Remember, this is just another kind of building." Ada smoothed Sarah's hair. "And she's not gone. She's in your kindness, Margaret's joy, your father's steadfastness. She's in every good thing she taught you. That doesn't end because someone new comes to love you too." They stayed until the stars came out, then walked back to find Cassian and Margaret on the porch, wrapped in quilts and watching the sky. "There you are," Cassian said, making room for them. "Margaret was just telling me about the new constellations she's invented." "That one's a teapot," Margaret announced, pointing. "And that's a dancing bear. And that one," she paused dramatically. "That's our family. See 4 stars all connected." Ada felt Cassian's hand find hers in the darkness. Sarah's weight against her side. Margaret's infectious wonder at the world. 4 stars. Indeed not the same constellation that had been, but something new and precious in its own right. Later, in the room Cassian had built with windows facing east, Ada lay beside her husband and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From Baltimore's desperate streets to Wyoming's endless skies. From a woman with nothing but fear to one rich in unexpected love. "Don't watch me sleep," she whispered into the darkness, smiling at how the phrase had evolved from plea to promise to something like a prayer. "I won't," Cassian replied, pulling her closer. "I'll be too busy being grateful you're here to wake beside." Outside, the wind sang through the sage, and snow began to fall, the first of the season, blanketing the world in fresh white. Inside, the ward house settled into sleep, 4 hearts under one roof, each carrying their own stories of loss and searching, now bound together by the choice to build something new from the pieces left behind. In the morning, there would be pancakes to make and chores to do and a life to build day by ordinary day. But tonight, Ada Ward, no longer Marlowe, no longer alone, closed her eyes and felt the solid certainty of home, built board by board, stitch by stitch, choice by careful choice. And somewhere in the gentle space between sleep and waking, she could almost hear it, the sound of new rooms being added to old hearts, of love making space for whatever comes next. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying Don't Watch Me Sleep, whether you're listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while doing chores or relaxing. Please share your thoughts and let me know what touched your heart in this tale of finding home and love in the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video. And don't forget to hit the hype button so more people can discover and enjoy these authentic Western tales. Your support means the world and helps these stories reach fellow lovers of Western romance and frontier life. Until our next journey into the Old West, partners,